Not just to Carole, but everyone.
Hope we've got that pointed in the right direction. It's a rather intimidating series of speakers to be following, and I'll try and be brief so that we can get to afternoon tea. I'd like to acknowledge today that this presentation and our GP training program is part of a team effort, despite the fact that I wasn't able to persuade anybody else to do the presentation for me today. So in 2016, JCU strengthened and extended its training pathway by adding GP training. Our GP training program covers a large amount of Queensland, including the rural and remote areas, and is established in a distributed model with 11 nodes with offices set up that provide support to registrars, supervisors, and training practices in their area. The aim of our program is to attract registrars who want a challenging and rewarding career, provide them with transformative learning experiences, and leading to fellows who make a difference by providing patient-centred care. The aim of our study is to explore the question, does a previous rural training lead to rural and remote workforce for GPs? We have a very simple methodology. We start by asking our registrars some background questions to try and get a better understanding of who we're attracting. We then explore their educational experiences, and at exit, we follow them up. So who are we attracting? This year, in our entry cohort, 36% came from rural clinical schools, the majority from JCU, and from the University of Queensland. Cameron, one of our registrars, is a typical remote registrar. He enjoyed his rural and remote placement so much that he came back again to do his GP training and is currently still there. This year we also found that 26% of our cohort had participated in rural programs. So when our registrars commence their primary care placements, we ask them where are their intentions of practicing in the next 5 years. And we found that the majority of our registrars are keen to work in regional, rural and remote areas, which is very different from the picture of GPs practicing nationally. So what sort of experiences are our registrars having? Our registrars tend to spend longer in rural and remote areas, 92% compared to only 55% nationally. And we attract a lot of registrars who want to do advanced skills, traditional procedural skills like obstetrics and anaesthetics, and this provides them with a very satisfying and wide range of practice. In partnership with the Queensland Rural Generalist Program, we've been working to increase registrars participating in other advanced skills, mental health, paediatrics, internal medicine, Aboriginal health. And registrars find that being able to provide these advanced skills in their communities is a very satisfying experience, and they describe it as transformative. We recently did a research project in partnership with Monash and confirmed that a greater number of JCU registrars and supervisors are practicing in socioeconomically disadvantaged areas and areas of workforce need, with high Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander populations, when compared to the distribution of GPs across the region. As part of our vision, we're wanting to build capacity in underserved areas, and over the last couple of years, we've been providing increased support and establishing new training posts in some of these areas, and you can see those highlighted in the pink and the red pins. Our registrars really appreciate and value the opportunity to become part of their community. And they also really value being able to see the difference that they're making, and that difference can be quite visible on a day-to-day basis. So whereabouts are our fellows? Bryce Nicol, who's in Winton, has stayed on as a fellow now because of the fulfilling experience that he's found practicing in rural and remote areas. Since we started in 2016, we've had 249 fellows, and this is their geospatial mapping of their location across Australia. And we're finding that the majority are based in regional, rural, and remote areas. And looking at whereabouts they're practicing their advanced skills, we find that a large number of them are practicing in remote areas and in some of the smaller rural areas by the coast. So if we look at the various disciplines, we find Aboriginal health, adult internal medicine, anaesthetics, emergency medicine, obstetrics and gynecology, paediatrics, and surgical skills. Milo, one of our remote fellows, has been working up in the Torres Strait and has stayed on as a fellow. And some of the reasons for that are being able to provide continuity of care, having a varied scope of practice, and opportunities available for lifestyle. Other registrars are attracted by early career advancement, and certainly this is another factor that helps retain fellows. So if we look at rural practice intention in 5 years' time at entry, you can see there the grey column is the number of registrars who completed the survey. And if we look at the grey row, this is the mean modified Monash score that they've achieved. So we found that registrars who hadn't had a rural clinical school background had an average score of about 2.1, and JCU registrars were at the other end of the scale with scores of 2.8. So we found that GP registrars at entry with a rural clinical school background were more likely to practice or intend to practice rurally in 5 years' time. When we looked again at fellowship and where their actual location was, we found that the mean rurality of practice location had increased, particularly for the JCU graduates. And again, at exit, asking them about their intentions for practicing over the next 5 years, we find that graduates who had attended rural clinical schools were more likely to intend to practice in rural and remote areas. We looked at our fellows and compared JCU medical graduates with graduates from other medical schools, and we found that there was an increasing proportion of JCU graduates working in remote and rural locations. When we looked at national data, we found that compared to Australia as a whole, Queensland GPs were more likely to be working in regional areas, and again, JCU fellows were far more likely to be found in rural and remote areas. So does a rural pathway matter? Well, that again depends a bit on what your goal is. If you're looking at numbers of registrars needed to achieve a rural and remote workforce, what we find historically is that we needed to train about 100 GPs in order to have 10 work in rural and remote locations. What we're finding with the current JCU pathway is about 47 of the 100 are working in rural and remote areas. And I'm aware that this is historical data and that we're not able to that they're not comparing apples exactly with apples. But even if some of our current JCU graduates move back into metropolitan areas, they've had a significant workforce impact in underserved areas in terms of providing large numbers of remote clinical service years. So in conclusion, we've found that having a previous rural and remote background certainly assists or leads people towards developing an interest in working in rural and remote areas. But interestingly, when we look at the background of our fellows who are working in rural and remote areas across Queensland, only about half of them have a rural clinical school background. And this highlights the importance of attracting graduates from medical schools, regardless of where they trained. And certainly having great rural and remote training experiences attracts many of our registrars, and also the opportunity for great mentoring and supervision is another attractor. So in terms of absolute numbers, what we've found is that attracting and selecting medical graduates who don't have a rural clinical school background and providing them with educational experiences that are pleasurable and exciting is as important in terms of developing a future rural and remote workforce as providing a rural pathway for rural clinical school graduates. Thank you.